Watching documentaries is a good way to learn about the world around us, historic events, famous people, and other interesting subjects. But some documentaries leave the viewer feeling unsettled due to the nature of the events that they depict, and which are still spoken about years later. Number 10. Water parks are supposed to be places where people can relax and have some fun on the slides and in the pools that are available. But just like most pools, they can also be very dangerous. One park in particular gained such a bad reputation during the 1980s and 90s that directors Seth Porges and Chris Charles Scott decided to feature it in a documentary. The title of that documentary is Class Action Park, and it centers on Action Park, a water amusement venue in New Jersey that opened in 1978 and closed down for good in 1996. While it was a very popular attraction, the park broke many rules. According to people who remember visiting the park when they were teenagers, they would regularly encounter employees who were no more than 14 years old, which is a heinous violation of labor laws, as well as health and safety regulations. These employees were not only unqualified to supervise the rides that they were placed in charge of, but the slides and rides themselves were often in a state of disrepair, since maintenance wasn't carried out on a regular basis. On many occasions, people would emerge from the slides with injuries such as broken bones, lacerations, or even missing teeth. This was by no means the worst of it, though, as several people lost their lives as a direct result of utilizing the park's equipment. On one occasion, a visitor to the park was thrown from one of the rides, and they ended up falling onto a set of rocks, losing their life in the process. It would then come to light that the park's management had been warned to remove those very rocks, since they posed a very serious threat to the safety of the park's patrons. In another incident, someone lost their life after being electrocuted in a pool. This was thanks to a piece of machinery that had become partially submerged in the water and had clearly not been checked on for a long time. Accidents were so frequent that the park started purchasing its own ambulances. To make matters worse, the company's liability insurance, which was set up by the owner, Gene Mulvihill, was set up in the Cayman Islands, and anyone who dared try to sue the park would be met with fierce resistance. In many cases, victims dropped their cases due to a lack of funds, but those who forged ahead and won would have to wait months or even years before receiving settlements. It was common for the park to hold out on these payments until they were forced to hand over the money by the courts or marshals. One tragic incident that happened at the park is still spoken about today. 19-year-old George Larson visited the park on the 8th of July, 1980, with a few of his friends. At one point during the day, he decided to take on the notorious Alpine slide, which was 2,700 feet long and which required visitors to navigate the slide using a small sled. But the brakes on the sled that George was using were broken, and he slid off the track. He then tumbled down the hillside and hit his head on the rocks below. He was rushed to the hospital, but passed away on the 16th of July that year. His family received a $100,000 settlement after it came to light that the park's liability insurance was fake, and only after Mulvihill did his best to blame George for that accident. While Class Action Park doesn't solely focus on the negative aspects of the park, most people are relieved that it has now been closed down forever. Number 9. The Cheshire Murders is an HBO documentary that was created by Kate Davis and David Heilbronner, which focuses on the horrific crime that was committed in Cheshire, Connecticut in 2007. The details of the case are shocking, and the two directors have been praised for their handling of the subject. On Sunday, the 22nd of July that year, the Petty family had attended church, after which Jennifer Hawk Petty and her two daughters, Michaela and Haley, went to the beach to spend some time in the sun. William, Jennifer's husband, headed to a local golf course to play around, and none of them could have foreseen that this would be the last day that they would spend together. Following a busy day, they went to bed, and early the following morning, they'd be thrown into what must have seemed like a horror film. It would later come to light that before they had dinner the previous evening, Jennifer and Michaela went to a grocery store to buy some ingredients for dinner, and while there, a man named Joshua Komisarjevsky chose them as his next targets, and he followed them home. At 3 a.m., he and an accomplice, Stephen Hayes, broke into the family's house and immediately targeted William. They assaulted him with baseball bats, and once he was immobilized, they tied Jennifer and the two daughters up. William was locked in the house's basement, and 6 hours later, Jennifer was forced into a vehicle. The two criminals then drove her to a bank where she was told to withdraw $15,000. But thinking quickly, she managed to scrawl a note on a slip of paper, and the bank manager was notified of the situation. He called 911 and informed the operator that Jennifer and her family were being held captive by two men. He added that Jennifer had shown him a photo of her two daughters and pleaded with him to believe her. Luckily, he could tell she was in serious distress and didn't think twice before alerting the authorities. Unfortunately, the police decided to go to the bank first before racing to the Petty family's home, and by the time they arrived, the crime had run its course. Jennifer was found deceased, and it was determined that she'd been strangled. After ending her life, Joshua used a can of gasoline to set fire to the house, and Haley and Michaela both lost their lives due to smoke inhalation. They then fled, leaving William in the basement with serious injuries, but he managed to make it out of the house in time, despite his legs still being tied up. He was able to provide the police with details of the crime and descriptions of the two attackers. Joshua and Hayes were tracked down and arrested, after which they were charged with kidnapping, burglary, and assault. Joshua was also charged with arson for setting fire to the house. The jury took 5 days to render a verdict against Joshua, and after being found guilty of all the charges against him, he was sentenced to be executed. Number 8. 2010 saw the release of a documentary entitled The House of Sue, which details the strange and convoluted case involving the Sue family that was living in California in 1993. Catherine and Andrew Sue were brought to the U.S. from Korea in 1976 when they were still children in hopes of creating a better life for the family. Their parents, Ronald and Elizabeth, decided to settle in Chicago, where they opened up a dry cleaning store. At one point, they asked their neighbors to be the children's godparents, but the neighbors didn't think it was a good idea. According to Andrew, his father was a strict man who demanded a lot from his family. This created a lot of tension between him and Catherine, who felt that his rules were unfair. She was not allowed to date any non-Korean men and enjoy her life, but Ronald saw this as insubordination. Before long, the two started hating each other. He would regularly assault her for disobeying his orders, and on one occasion, he even tried to set himself and Catherine on fire. As for William, he was an honor student, a football player, and a student body president, which made his father proud. His life was set out before him, as he'd been awarded a full scholarship from the Rhode Island Providence College. But in 1985, the family's lives would take a turn for the worst when Ronald was diagnosed with cancer. He knew he didn't have long to live and asked Andrew to take care of the family once he was gone. By this time, he and Catherine were not on the best of terms, since their personalities had started to clash. 2 years later, Elizabeth lost her life during a robbery gone wrong at the family's dry cleaning store, and so Catherine was named as Andrew's legal guardian. He would eventually attend college while Catherine started dating Robert O. DeBane. At first, this arrangement seemed to work well, but after Andrew returned home from his first year of college, things took a sinister turn. Catherine somehow convinced him that Robert was the one responsible for the attack on Elizabeth, and that he needed to pay for what he had done. She added that he had assaulted her on several occasions, and that he had a gambling addiction and was wreaking havoc on their finances. After her insistence, Andrew decided that he needed to end Robert's life, and Catherine supplied him with the means to do so in the form of a firearm. He traveled to Robert's house and waited for him in the garage. When Robert arrived, Andrew fired twice and ended his life. He then stole his wallet to make it look like a robbery before fleeing the scene. It would only be a matter of days before investigators figured out what had happened, and the two siblings were arrested. Catherine, while out on bail, fled to Hawaii, where she started a new life under the name of Tiffany Escada, and started dating a personal trainer named Kelmer Beck. Nevertheless, she was convicted of the crime and sentenced to life in prison. Andrew was also found guilty, and he managed to avoid the death penalty thanks to the fact that he was being manipulated by his sister. but he'll also spend the rest of his life behind bars. Number 7. Mining is one of the most dangerous professions in the world, and it takes a very specific type of person to make a long career out of it. Miners work deep underground in high temperatures and constantly face the possibility of mine collapses, flooding, escaping toxic gases, and other dangers such as faulty explosives. The documentary Harlan County, USA tells the story of a group of miners who, in 1973, were employed at the Brookside coal mine in Harlan County, Kentucky. That year, they decided to join the United Mine Workers of America union after growing tired of the Southern Labor Union. They felt that this union only had the interests of their employer, the Eastover Mining Company, at heart, and that a change was necessary to protect not only their interests but their lives. The mining company was a subsidiary of Duke Power, which refused to sign the new contracts that had been proposed by the United Mine Workers Union, and as a result, 180 of the miners decided to embark on a legal strike. The strike started in July of 1973, and before long, the story was being covered by the media. It also caught the attention of director Barbara Koppel, and she decided to travel to Harlan County with a camera crew. She interviewed the miners, documented the arrests that were made, and recorded allegations of corruption that were made against the company. There had also been allegations of murder, and the miners felt that the film crew's presence would prevent similar crimes from being committed. Before long, threats were being made against Barbara's life, since she was seen as a nuisance and troublemaker. 9 months after the strike started, some of the miners traveled to Wall Street, where they handed out flyers detailing the situation. It revealed that the miners were not being compensated as they should, and that they were working in horrendous conditions, and that they were merely seen as cogs in a machine, rather than hard-working human beings. Furthermore, several ex-employees at the mine had contracted black lung, with several passing away thanks to the condition. Others lost their lives in roof collapses that could have been prevented had the proper safety procedures been followed. In several incidents, the miners were threatened with firearms, but they produced their own in defiance. Violence was a daily occurrence between the workers, the police, strikebreakers, and guards at the mine. The situation took a deadly turn when a supervisor called Billy C. Bruner fired at and ended the life of a miner called Lawrence Jones. This threw the strike into a national spotlight, and months later, 2 more miners were injured during a confrontation that escalated into firearms being discharged. The strike lasted a full 13 months, after which Duke Power had no choice but to accept the demands. The miners' joining of the union was finally accepted. They received a wage increase, and better health and safety regulations were put into place. Number 6. Most of us are familiar with the Charles Manson case, which claimed the lives of several people in August of 1969. Manson has since passed away, but he remains one of the most famous serial killers of all time, despite never actually ending anyone's life with his own hands. The documentary, My Life After Manson, follows the life of Patricia Krenwinkel, one of Manson's followers who carried out his orders on that fateful night, and how she dealt with the crimes she committed after her incarceration. She also discusses her childhood growing up in Los Angeles, California, and the fact that she suffered from low self-esteem as a result of bullying. Her parents eventually got divorced, after which she stayed with her father while teaching catechism, and for a while she considered being a nun. But she decided to move in with her half-sister in Manhattan Beach and started working as a clerk instead, and it was here she met Charles Manson in 1967. She was quickly taken in by his charm, and he convinced her, along with several other people, to move with him to San Francisco. The following year, she, Manson, and their growing family, as they like to call the group, moved to Spawn Beach in the San Bernardino Valley, where they would use illegal substances and listened to talks given by Manson. Then, on the night of the 8th of August, 1969, Manson ordered several members of his family, including Patricia, to travel to the house of Roman Polanski and his wife Sharon Tate. At the time, Polanski was not home, but 4 other people were present. They were ordered to end the lives of everyone in the house, and the group was determined to do as they were told. Patricia ran after Abigail Folger, and after catching up with her, ended her life with a sharp blade. But this was not the last time that she committed such a heinous crime. The following night, she helped end the lives of Lino and Rosemary LaBianca, just a few miles from the Polanski house in Los Feliz. The crimes caused outrage worldwide, and Patricia was soon arrested alongside her accomplices. She was handed the death penalty, but when capital punishment was banned, her sentence was changed to life in prison. By that time, she had appeared in the documentary, which was created by Olivia Klaus. She was 66 years old and had become the longest-serving female inmate in California. She stated she carried out the crimes because she just wanted to feel accepted and loved, and because she was a coward who could not go against Manson's wishes. Today, Patricia remains incarcerated at the California Institute for Women, and only time will tell whether she'll be recommended for parole anytime soon. Number 5. The assassination of ex-President John F. Kennedy remains one of the most intriguing cases in the history of the United States. Many people believe that the true mystery behind the case remains unsolved, and that one of those figures, who became known as Umbrella Man, is discussed in the documentary The Umbrella Man. The short film explains that the Umbrella Man was, in fact, Louis Stephen Witt, who was holding his black umbrella as a protest against Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. and the fact that he supported the British policy of appeasement towards Adolf Hitler during the 1930s. The policy was put into place by the then Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, who was known to carry an umbrella. But the film also focuses on some of the more elaborate conspiracy theories that emerged following Kennedy's assassination. On the 22nd of November, 1963, Kennedy's limousine turned onto Elm Street at around 12:30 p.m., and shortly after, several shots rang out. Kennedy was fatally wounded, and in the months and years that followed, the footage of those last moments has been extensively studied, since many people believe that Lee Harvey Oswald, who was arrested for the crime, was not the actual attacker. One still image from the footage shows Witt standing on the sidewalk with his umbrella held open over his head. This caused a lot of suspicion amongst conspiracy theorists, since it was a sunny day and they couldn't understand why anyone would have an umbrella in this manner. One of the first theories to emerge was that the Umbrella Man was holding a type of weapon that could fire a paralyzing dart at a target, and that this was done to Kennedy that day. This theory was supported by Robert Cutler, a former lieutenant of the U.S. Navy, and several other experts. Others suggested that he wasn't merely holding the umbrella over his head, but that his gesture was actually a signal to his co-conspirators who were hiding nearby, and who opened fire just a few moments later. Number 4. The murder of 28-year-old Kitty Genovese remains one of the most intriguing in the history of New York. The Witness, a 2015 documentary created by James Solomon, follows Kitty's brother Bill as he investigates the crime decades after the fact. Kitty, who was born Catherine Susan Genovese, was born in Brooklyn in 1935, the oldest of 5 siblings. She attended Prospect Heights High School, where she achieved good grades and was seen as somewhat of a class clown. She finished high school in 1953, after which her family decided to move to New Canaan in Connecticut. This was done after Kitty's mother saw someone's life being ended on a street in Brooklyn, and she no longer felt safe there. Kitty stayed behind in New York and found a job as a clerk with an insurance company, but to make extra money, she also worked at the bar during the night. She started as a bartender, but was soon promoted to bar manager, and hence she decided to relocate to Queens. Years later, she met Mary Ann Zelongo in a nightclub, and they started a relationship. They decided to move in together after finding a suitable apartment in Kew Gardens, an apartment complex in Queens. Originally, the events in this case were reported as follows. On the 13th of March, 1964, Kitty was employed as a bar manager at Ev's 11th Hour Bar in Hollis, Queens, and at around 2:30 a.m., she had just finished her shift for the night. She left the bar and was on her way home when she was approached by a man who was holding a blade, and she tried to run to her apartment to get away, but the man caught up with her at her apartment building's front door. There, he proceeded to attack her with a blade, causing Kitty to scream in pain. One neighbor was heard yelling for him to leave her alone, and the attacker fled. Kitty, gravely injured and fearing for her life, managed to crawl to the back of the apartment building in an effort to hide. Unfortunately, this also made it impossible for any witnesses to see what was happening, and the man returned. He assaulted Kitty again, using the same blade, before robbing her and fleeing once more. Sophia Farrar, one of Kitty's neighbors, found her behind the building and called for someone to notify the police of the attack. When they arrived, Kitty was still alive, and she was taken to a hospital, but by the time she got there, she'd passed away. Mary was one of the first people to be notified of her passing at about 4 a.m. that morning. The police would return to her apartment at 7 a.m. to question her and found her in the company of Carl Ross, her neighbor, who kept interfering while officers were trying to speak to Mary, so he was arrested for disorderly conduct. Ross had been named a suspect since Kitty was found at the bottom of a set of stairs that led to his apartment, and soon Mary was named as a fellow suspect, despite there being no evidence that she was involved in the attack, or that she had a motive to want to harm Kitty. Days later, police officers responded to reports of a robbery that was committed by a man named Winston Mosley. They tracked him down, and when his car, a white Corvair, was searched, investigators found a stolen TV set in the trunk. He was arrested, and it was soon discovered that he was a career burglar who specialized in stealing appliances like TVs and radios. The lead detective in Kitty's case remembered a crucial detail from that night. A witness had reported that Kitty's attacker drove a white car, but when Mosley was questioned about this, he chose not to answer. Two other detectives then noticed that Mosley had sustained injuries to one of his hands, and they suggested that Mosley had suffered these injuries while he was attacking Kitty. Mosley immediately confessed and confirmed his guilt by referencing information that was only known to the police at the time. He stated that on that night, he'd parked his car when he saw Kitty at a traffic light for the first time. He added that he'd been looking for a victim all night and that she was the perfect target, so he took advantage of that opportunity. It would later come to light that he'd attacked several other women and ended the lives of 2 others. He would later claim that the attack on Kitty was carried out by members of the mob and that he was merely their getaway driver, but his claims were dismissed and he was found guilty and sentenced to be executed, though his sentence was later commuted to life in prison. He passed away on the 28th of March 2016 at the age of 81. Number 3. In 2010, BBC released the documentary Madness in the Fast Lane, and it details the bizarre 2008 case of Swedish identical twin sisters, Sabina and Ursula Eriksson, on the M6 motorway in England, much of which was caught on camera. On May 16th, after traveling from Liverpool, the 2 twins exhibited peculiar behavior at Kiel services. Police questioned them but deemed them safe. Later, a BBC motorway cops crew filmed the sisters walking and running dangerously through M6 traffic. Highway officers removed them, but Ursula suddenly ran into traffic and was seriously injured by an articulated lorry. Sabina then followed suit and was hit by a car and was unconscious for 15 minutes. While receiving aid, Sabina struck an officer and ran into traffic again. Ursula also refused treatment, swearing and scratching at officers. The incident shut down the motorway for 4 hours. Both were transported to a hospital. Sabina was discharged 5 hours later, arrested, and pleaded guilty to trespassing and assault, receiving a 1-day sentence. She was never evaluated for mental health issues. Searching for Ursula, Sabina arrived in Stoke-on-Trent. That evening, she encountered Glenn Hollinshead and Peter Malloy, and accepted Glenn's offer to stay at his home in Fenton. Sabina soon began acting strangely. The next day, she fatally attacked Glenn with a kitchen blade. She fled, stole a hammer, and was later seen hitting herself with it. She assaulted a passing motorist and was pursued by the police, but she jumped from the Heron Cross Bridge, suffering multiple fractures. Ursula later returned to Sweden. Sabina was charged with manslaughter and sentenced to 5 years and was released in 2011. Number 2. The Zodiac killer case remains one of the most perplexing, unsolved cases involving a serial killer in the United States, as the person responsible for these crimes has not been identified, despite many clues being found and letters containing ciphers being sent to the police by the culprit. This is the Zodiac Speaking is an Ari Mark and Phil Lott documentary that details the information that's been gathered during the investigation, including the fact that Arthur Leigh Allen was named as the leading suspect. Some of his former students recalled how he used to show an interest in cryptology, and that he exhibited some strange behavior, such as often playing the folk song Tom Dooley, which is about a woman who loses her life in an attack. It also includes the allegations made against Allen by his former friends, the Seawater family, which feels confident that Allen is the Zodiac killer. Despite this, insufficient evidence has been found to implicate Allen in the Zodiac crimes, and he completed his probation for other heinous crimes in 1982. As for the Zodiac, his case started in 1969 when the San Francisco Examiner received a letter from him. The letter was written in code that was later deciphered, and in it, the author stated that he enjoyed ending people's lives because he found it fun. According to a timeline that's been created by investigators, the culprit ended the lives of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen in Benicia on the 20th of December 1968. In July of the next year, he attacked Darlene Ferrin and Michael Mageau with a firearm, and Darlene passed away while Michael managed to survive. Then on the 27th of September that year, he used a blade to attack Cecilia Shepard and Brian Hartnell in Napa County. This time, Brian pulled through while Cecilia lost her life. Less than a month later, he ended the life of Paul Stein in San Francisco with a firearm. It's believed that he ended the lives of at least 37 people, and until the 29th of January, 1974, he sent several badly spelled letters to the press and the police, taunting them for failing to identify and apprehend him. 15 pieces of correspondence have been identified, and out of the 4 codes that were sent, 2 have been deciphered. Unfortunately, they've not offered any further clues as to his identity, and the 2 remaining ciphers are very short, making them almost impossible to solve. The case has since been marked as inactive by the San Francisco Police Department, though it is still being investigated by Napa County. Number 1. Bus 174 is a documentary directed by Jose Padilla, in which the events surrounding a failed bus hijacking in Brazil in the year 2000 are recreated. But it also details the plight of street children in Rio de Janeiro and the less desirable aspects of that city. The events of that day, the 12th of June, started just after 6 a.m. when 21-year-old Sandro Barbosa do Nascimento got onto the number 174 bus in Jardim Botânico in Rio de Janeiro with the aim of robbing the passengers that were on board. He produced a firearm and told the passengers to keep calm while he collected their belongings, but while he was doing so, one of the passengers managed to get the attention of military police members who were passing by, and they managed to bring the bus to a halt. This resulted in a tense hostage situation, as Nascimento refused to leave the bus and started threatening the lives of those on board. News of the situation soon spread, and before long the bus was surrounded by police officers and news outlets. Nascimento demanded that the police supply him with weapons and a driver who could help him escape, since the bus driver had managed to flee. The police refused to give in to his demands, and as a result, Nascimento stated that if he was still being ignored by 6 p.m., he would end one of the hostages' lives. 6 p.m. came and went, and at 7 p.m., he told the hostages to go along with the plan that he had formulated. He pretended to fire at Janina Lopez, who was lying on the bus's floor, and then used a school teacher as a shield while he got off the bus. While speaking to everyone around him, an officer snuck up behind Nascimento with his firearm at the ready, but before he could fire, Nascimento spotted him and jerked away, falling to the ground with the school teacher still in his grip. The officer fired and hit the hostage, but Nascimento fired back, hitting the teacher in the process and ending her life, though it's been suggested that the shot fired by the policeman actually ended her life. What followed was a scene of complex chaos. The crowd that had gathered was outraged and descended on Nascimento with the aim of delivering mob justice. The police were quick to react, and he was taken into custody before members of the public could apprehend him. This was not the end of the case, though, as it was later announced that Nascimento had passed away due to asphyxiation. This caused a lot of confusion among the public, who started accusing the police of intentionally ending his life as punishment for his crime, which was broadcast by TV stations around the country. Several of the arresting officers were then arrested themselves and put on trial, but a jury chose not to convict them, and they returned to service shortly after. The shot that was fired by the officer and which struck the hostage was also found to have been unintentional, and so no one was charged with ending her life. The documentary also details Nascimento's early life, during which he witnessed his mother's life being ended, and the tough life that he lived on the streets after the fact. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.